Thank you, folks. Welcome to the Film Fan Club Show. I'm Sam Carrico, and as always, we've got a great show for you tonight. Later on, we'll discuss Rebel Moon Part 1 from our favorite visionary, Zack Snyder. But boy, we've had some exciting news in the world of movies recently, huh? Apparently, director Craig Gillespie, the mastermind behind 2021's Cruella, is looking to steer the ship for DC's Supergirl, because apparently nothing says superhero blockbuster like a touch of punk rock fashion, right? I can't wait to see Supergirl flying around with a killer makeover and a killer attitude. Geez, with the guy from Cruella directing and James Gunn producing, that soundtrack is gonna sound like the 1970s threw up. And in some more superhero news, actress Julia Garner is joining the Marvel Cinematic Universe as a female version of the Silver Surfer in the upcoming Fantastic Four reboot. Yeah, because who needs shiny cosmic surfboards when you can have a badass woman taking on the galaxy in style? Clearly Disney knows exactly what the fans want. But wait, there's more. A new Game of Thrones spin-off titled A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, the Hedge Knight is in the works. Because apparently George R.R. Martin is willing to milk this franchise in literally every conceivable way, except by actually writing The Winds of Winter. How long's it been now, George? In other news, Disney has announced they'll be releasing Toy Story 5 in 2026. Man, I mean, how many times can these toys cheat death and still make us cry? And don't even get me started on The Mandalorian and Grogu, also hitting theaters in 2026. Can't they just stay on Disney Plus where we can enjoy Baby Yoda's adorable antics from the comfort of our own homes? Don't mind me, I'll just be over here trying to resist the urge to buy a Baby Yoda plushie for the upteenth time. The real head scratcher for me is the latest installment of the Tron franchise. It's going to be titled Tron Ares and will star Jared Leto. I mean, who knew there was still a demand for glow-in-the-dark jumpsuits in futuristic disc battles? Hey, at least we know what Jared Leto's been up to when he's not sending used condoms to his co-stars, am I right? That was 2016, that was so long ago. Speaking of strange combinations, House of Cards creator Beau Willimon is dipping his toes into the Star Wars universe. He's going to be co-writing that upcoming Jedi Origin movie with Indiana Jones 5 director James Mangold. Plot details are still being kept under wraps, but given their previous work, one thing is for certain, the ending will be disappointing. Alright, moving on, we're talking about Rebel Moon Part 1 on the show today, and it got me thinking, can we please stop this trend of splitting movies into two parts? You guys remember when Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows and the Hunger Games Mockingjay were dragged out into two separate films? I mean, did we really need 2 hours of camping and political speeches? Sure, they made double the money, but the result is always a Part 1 that feels boring, and a Part 2 that's just overstuffed. Looking straight at you, Dune. It's not even a guarantee that you'll make more money, too. It's not even a guarantee that you'll make double the money. Let's not forget the recent flop that was Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. You know what happens when audiences see Part 1 in the title of a Mission Impossible movie? You get mission impaired at the box office. Alright, we've got a great show for you. Let's get right to our discussion of Rebel Moon Part 1. All right, let's welcome tonight's guest. He is the co-host of the Mission Matinee podcast, which of course was part of the Film Fan Club network of podcasts. John Lein is back with us. Hey, John.
Howdy.
It's good to see you, man. It's always a pleasure catching up and talking movies with you. I was just telling you before we started recording, I was talking about how much fun the Mission Matinee series, and I guess this is the first time that we're talking since that whole limited series has wrapped up. I guess we did some bonus content, but a lot of Mission Impossible news has happened. So I'm calling an audible real quick. I just want to get a feeler from you. How do you feel about the Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 did not do well? They delayed Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 2 by a year. They dropped Dead Reckoning Part 2 from the title. So now Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 is Part 1 of 1. How do you feel about all this? We loved this movie. I was just talking to you about how much fun it was to relive. I was listening to the podcast we did. I was having fun just listening. And it seems like the rest of the world didn't share that fun with us. How do you feel about that? I know this is off the top. I'm putting you on the spot, but I'm just curious.
I haven't really talked to a whole lot of people that have really even seen it. So I don't know how widely viewed it was in general. I fucking loved it. Hopefully they took Dead Reckoning Part 2 off the end of the next one just as like a image thing and they're not going to change anything. Like, it'd be real weird if they
Yeah.
go, okay, we're doing a different movie.
Yeah.
How do you progress from the end of part one without resolving part two? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it can't actually not be part two,
No,
right?
I think it's still going to be story-wise, thematically, as far as the plot. It's going to be part two. It's going to tie up the loose ends from. It's not like they're just going to like Glee season 6. For those who didn't watch the Glee series, Glee season 5 had a whole storyline going on. Glee season 6 just says, "Yeah, that all's done with. We're starting here now." You know, like they just it can. I don't think Dead Reckoning Part 2 is going to be like, "Yeah, we figured out the entity or the entity, right? That was the name."
we resolved it off camera.
Yeah, I don't think they're just going to be like moving on, like something like a Glee season 6 did with Glee season 5. I think
Yeah.
it's still going to be thematically a part 2. I just think they're going to, which probably was the right move to begin with. But it's weird once you've committed to naming one part 1, you need to name the next one part 2, or else you look kind of silly. It's
Yeah.
unfortunate. I think they look kind of silly. It's probably the best move to rename part 2 now because they don't want to tie it to a box office failure. So many people at this point are going to be like, well, we didn't see part 1, so why should I see part 2? So I think if instead it's called Mission Impossible Endgame or something, that'll be more people will be like, oh, okay, I'll watch that. But
Fingers crossed you can get the people who didn't see part one to still go see the second half of a movie that they
and that's got to be
did.
a nightmare for the editing team on Dead
Oh,
Reckoning
for
Part 2,
sure.
because now it's like you got to edit the movie in a way that, like, we got to assume that the people that are watching this movie haven't seen the first one. I'm
Right,
just
got to work some exposition scene in that explains what happened in one,
I
which was a
wonder
lot.
I wonder if they're doing any reshoots. Actually, I wonder if they've even. I should have researched this because I'm just thinking of this because you and I honestly was just listening to the Dead Reckoning arc that we went on last year. So much fun, and it just kills me to think that other people didn't have that same enjoyment leading up. They preferred Oppenheimer, and you can relate to this. Oppenheimer is ruining my life. I single handedly made Killers of the Flower Moon, and it's gonna steal my Best Picture win from me. And then we loved Dead Reckoning Part 1, and it just destroyed, it nearly killed the Mission Impossible franchise.
That's true.
What more do I have to lose?
Oppenheimer's gonna break into your house now.
Well, at least we still have Zack Snyder, right, John? At least we still had Zack Snyder, the award-winning director. I don't know what awards he's won. The award of my heart winning director of Watchmen, Man of Steel, Batman vs. Superman, the Ultimate Edition, Zack Snyder's Justice League. He's now directed Rebel Moon. You and I both saw Rebel Moon. So just for you, John, this episode is going to release a little bit closer to the premiere of Rebel Moon Part 2. Hopefully Part 1 will be a little bit more relevant because we've kind of missed that window. It came out in December. We're a little bit late to the party, but we watched Rebel Moon Part 1. I told you, man, like, it's Zack Snyder. He's got the title cards. He's got everything. He's got the visual flair. What more could you want? And you, like the hero that you are, you said, yeah, I'll watch Rebel Moon Part 1 and hopefully still Part 2 with you, Sam. And I said, thank you, John. And I got to say, before I throw to you, I just want to give my quick reaction to Rebel Moon Part 1. Yes, we'll still watch Part 2, but I really don't want to now because I think Rebel Moon Part 1 is a huge letdown. I could not be more heartbroken. I'm the biggest Zack Snyder fan, as you know. Like Watchmen, who has mastered the director's cut more than Zack Snyder? Nobody. Nobody. And maybe that's the problem, but this is the one time where you were talking about it before we started rolling. He wants to do a director's cut of this. I don't want to see any more of this. None of the characters were interesting. The storyline just seemed like a bunch of checkmark tropes from other better sci-fi movies. The cinematography was like visual noise, it felt like. This is what people told. I even liked Army of the Dead. I enjoyed Army of the Dead. He had everything going for him, and it pains me to say that Rebel Moon Part 1 is not good. What do you have to say, John?
It's mid. It's all right. From a pure okay. Zack Snyder wanted to make a Star Wars movie, and so he made a Star Wars movie with Justice League aesthetics. He still has the same slow-mo close-ups of stuff hitting the ground to signify drama, the same slow-mo wide shots of silhouettes doing a cool action pose. it's brighter colors than Justice League had because he wanted Justice League to be more muted, right? But it's it the cinematicness of it feels Justice League, and that all works well. It all creates the feeling that it wants to create, but it's not. It's kind of dumb, you know what I mean?
To
And
say the
it's
least.
and it's I didn't realize when I was watching it that he already has they made it with the plan of releasing a PG-13 cut and then a rated R cut. I just found out that they have a rated R cut in the bag already, waiting for some future release date they haven't like confirmed yet. Because and he was like he apparently said it was like almost a different movie because of all the adult stuff that they cut out to make it more
Well, it's a double-sided,
digestible.
yeah, it's a double-sided sword. Like I would kind of hope that it's almost a completely different movie because I didn't like this one. And
Oh,
that
that's true.
also, I don't know if the adult stuff, more adult stuff, would have saved the movie that we did see. It's just,
Yeah.
it was so disappointing. What I appreciate about the Zack Snyder's Justice League, Batman versus Superman, especially Batman versus Superman, the Ultimate Edition, is the
Mm-hmm.
characters are so rich. Wouldn't you agree, John? The character
Yeah,
of
I
Bruce
mean,
Wayne in Batman versus Superman, he goes on such an arc of being a stone cold vigilante who kills people, who has lost his way, to being the guy who still sees the good in everybody, including Clark Kent, including your everyday man. He forms the Justice League at the end of Batman versus Superman. And I felt like that's just so night and day from the hollow characters that we see in this movie.
yeah, I mean, it definitely, and if you know what, it does. Batman versus Superman is a great way to talk about it because the Batman versus Superman theatrical cut does like I enjoy the Batman versus Superman Snyder cut because it has you get to see a lot more of the depth and like the conditions that shape the mentality that Batman and Superman both as characters have going into their conflict and like the reasons why they're doing anything. Whereas the theatrical cut cuts a bunch of that stuff to make it a shorter runtime and to make it more palatable, but then it ends up making everything feel flatter. And without knowing that Rebel Moon was going to have an R-rated cut, it makes a lot of sense that Rebel Moon Part 1 felt flat to me.
I guess my difference from you is it sounds like you're almost giving it a little bit of slack. Like I give Batman versus Superman that slack. I give Justice League especially that slack
Mm-hmm.
because the theatrical, it was a mandate. We got to have this many showtime. It's all about showtimes per day or however many showtimes you can have per day at the theater. It can't be 4 hours because that means you can only have half as many showtimes, which means half as much profit. But with Netflix, the whole point of doing part one of two is that you can have as much time as you want. He could have probably did three because it was all like it sounds to me like Netflix gave him, I don't know how much it was. I think it was like 150 million or something like that, or excuse me, maybe just 50 million. And he was able to be like, okay, I can shoot enough material for two movies. I'm sure if he could have had that budget and made it over three movies, they would have let him.
Mm-hmm.
I don't buy the, oh, he was so constrained narrative. Part of me at this point, and it pains me to say this because I'm a Zack Snyder fan. If you can't make a good movie without having a director's cut, then what is I don't know. You're only half as good as another director. It's very disappointing.
Yeah, I mean, they should have absolutely just made the R-rated cut that he wanted to make, because that's the vision that he had as a creator, right?
Yeah.
And to make a PG-13 cut or a shortened cut because the studio mandates that is one thing. To make a PG-13 cut because you were like, well, we can make a palatable version and release it, and then make an R-rated version and release it. It's not the same thing, but like my thinking is that the stuff that he cuts would be similar kind of like tendon stuff that's not exactly necessary for the skeleton of the narrative, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But is necessary to make it all make sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I do think that the R-rated version would probably be better than the PG-13 version because it is more complete. And I think that the stuff that he removes to make the PG-13 one would be similar in content to the stuff that he removes to shorten it for time or to make it more
But is
whatever.
there enough in the version that you saw to make you want to see? Because I personally, we're going to talk about part two. I've committed to talking about part two. I want to see how the story ends, but
Right.
I don't want to. I've seen that we watched the Return of the King, or sorry, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and I just watched the theatrical cuts. But
Mm-hmm.
after by the end of covering that trilogy, which people can find on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, by the time we were done talking about Return of the King, I wanted to watch more. I'm going to go back at some point. You know, Miranda hasn't seen the Lord of the Rings trilogy. We should, whenever we do, we're going to watch the extended editions because I want to see more of that world. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if I want to see more of the Rebel Moon world. Do you, based on what you saw, want to see
No,
more, a longer
no.
version?
I mean, if we weren't going to talk about it, I could see just to satisfy my curiosity, not watching the PG-13 part two, and then when the R-rated versions come out, watching them.
Mm,
But if I also watch part two PG-13 to talk about it, I'm not then going to watch the R-rated version of part one and the R-rated version of part two.
yeah.
It's like Dune, right? Like it when I talk about Dune, the new, the new double
Yeah.
feature Dune, I talk about it as I enjoyed the first one, but I wouldn't recommend watching it until the second one is out because I don't think it works as its own cohesive thing. And so I think that I'm gonna rewatch Dune Part One and then see Dune Part Two, but I told my brother not to bother watching Part One until he's ready to watch Part Two, one after the other, because I think the completion aspect of it will make it worth it, right?
Yeah. Part one is definitely not as satisfying without having seen part two.
Right, exactly.
I feel like we could start going through the movie if you want to a little bit. I haven't really remembered a lot of the movie. It's been only like a week since I saw it. I saw it like last Thursday. Well, I guess it'd be easier for me to start talking about the characters a little bit. What did you think about, I mean, talking about, I mean, asking you about, what did you think about some of the characters in this movie? Of course, we got Sofia Boutella, who I really appreciate from the Kingsman movies. She's great in those. And she's also in a really bad movie called Climax. I don't know if you ever seen that. I saw it for Cade Thomas's Double Feature Movie Club. It was part of my homework for a podcast episode I was guest starring on, and it was one of the worst movies I've ever seen. So Sofia Boutella does have a little bit of a mixed bag, but I want to know about you, what you think about her playing the lead character in this movie.
You know, I feel the way about her playing the lead is I feel about almost everybody in the movie. Like they're all fine. They're all acceptable in the role, but the characters are all a little flat or stale in a way that didn't have me really engaged with anybody. There were moments where I thought maybe something cool, something it might do something interesting that takes these tropes and displays them in a new light or from a new perspective, but it didn't really. And so her character is the former soldier who's
Right.
done some traumatic thing in her past. Are we doing spoilers?
Yeah, I figured by the time this is released, people will be kind of hopefully getting ready for part two, so they'll probably
Okay.
want to recap. So yeah, we could talk about the specific plot beats, however far you want to
My
go.
my assumption is that she killed the king that was or whatever, the king that died, whatever they call
Yeah,
it. My assumption is she assassinated the king and the king's magical healing daughter. And so that's her horrible secret past. And then she got exiled because her adopted dad uh, was using her the whole time to create the perfect assassin to kill the king so he could take over. But she ends up on a little farm village where she has to learn from the simple people of the earth to be good.
well, Well, the characters are just so thin. I'm honestly, as you started talking about her, I was like, oh yeah, she was like, she's like, she feels bad because she served some time for the bad guy team, right? And then she's like living on this farm planet. Whenever Ed Skrine's character comes, Ed Skrine plays like the most generic villain I've ever seen in my life. He's just bad. There's very little nuance to the character. I don't know.
They're cartoonish evil
Yeah.
soldiers.
The more I talk about it, the more sad I get because I just think about like how great Clark Kent's character is in Man of Steel, how Henry Cavill plays a very three-dimensional version of Superman, and how in Batman vs Superman, Ben Affleck plays Bruce Wayne like a real person, and then at the it's just sad, you know. Like and I'm in Watchmen. Watchmen is one of the best superhero movies I've seen. So it's just very sad to see. Ed Skrein sucks, yeah, as a villain. Darkseid is a better villain than this.
Yeah. There's like weird, interesting little moments with I think his character's name is Admiral Noble or something.
Yeah, Atticus Noble.
Yeah, so there's weird little moments, like there's the shot where his aide comes to tell him something and he's taking some sort of hookah drug through a port in his skin.
Yeah.
And then a tentacle monster wraps itself around him from behind like he's gonna have sex with it or something.
Like what?
Like, I assume that that's a longer scene in the R-rated version, where the tentacle monster is like a being that he uses to pleasure himself or some weird shit.
Well, it's just frustrating. Like we just watched the 2010 hit film Valentine's Day. I don't know if you've seen it, John, but Taylor Swift and Taylor Lautner play love interests in that movie. I realized when I was watching it last night that their characters are in it mostly for believe it or not, the characters are in it mostly for the novelty of the actors playing them. But there's some deleted scenes, or they have a blooper reel rather at the end. And you can see in the blooper reel that they like had like a tiara. They were like prom king and queen, and I'm like, they cut a whole storyline from the movie, and that's what it feels like with Ed Skrine's character. Like there's like maybe a whole backstory there that we lost, and I'm sure the Valentine's Day reference was worth it, but you know, it just I hate whenever a movie does that. And again, you have to have a cohesive film. It feels a little, and also Amazing Spider-Man 2 is another example of stuff they shot a lot for, and they cut so much out of it, it just doesn't make sense anymore.
I mean, one, like, there's in the climax, Cora, Sofia Boutella's character.
I love that you had to look up her name because they're all forgettable.
I absolutely had to look up all their names. Cora and Noble are like fighting to the death in the climactic moment, and
to the death, quote unquote.
Yes, the death.
God, that pissed me off.
Well, it was inevitable. I'm like,
oh no, go ahead.
Snyder doesn't kill villains.
Yeah, you go ahead. We'll get there. Oh man, that made me so mad though.
So they're fighting on a floating platform. It's very Star Wars-y, Darth Vader versus Luke Skywalker kind of like vibe.
Yeah.
And he's on his knees because she's beaten him, and he like coughs up blood and then laughs and says, "This is perfect." And I, for some reason, at that moment, thought that he was the guy who adopted her off of the war planet when she was a little kid, right? Because her character is that she was a little girl on a planet that rebelled against the Empire. The Empire sent the guy who replaced the king, Belisarius, with a whole bunch of soldiers to go crush her planet's rebellion. And then Belisarius led his troops from the front and stumbled upon her in an alleyway. And she picked up a gun, and he allowed her to put it against his chin, which is a kind of tired trope of, okay, yeah, shoot me if you can shoot me kind of thing. And then she pulls the trigger, but the safety was on, so the trigger doesn't kill him. And so then he adopts her because she proved to him that she had some fire in her or whatever. Then she gets trained to be a badass soldier. She does a bunch of genocides for this empire that we're supposed to simultaneously think was like an honorable, grand, just civilization, but also has soldiers that are cartoonishly evil rape villains. But that's beside the point. She defects, and then they're fighting a rebellion against the Empire. She's leading the rebellion against the bad guys because the farmers are being imperiled.
Yeah. This
And
movie was basically just like a whole, like a getting the team together mission, right? It was a lot of table setting.
I thought it was going to be like a Magnificent Seven thing. Like I feel like part two is going to be like Magnificent Seven, Seven Samurai, kind of like this group of heroes defending this farm village.
But it was so unbalanced though. It'd be nice if like maybe we had a little bit of that in this movie. I don't know. It's part of the part 1 and 2 problem. I feel like there's another film that I saw, like Amazing or Across the Spider-Verse had a similar issue where it was so much table setting, and then we finally get somewhere, and then bam, part 2 coming next, however many years from now, and it's like, what the heck are we doing?
Yeah, you know what didn't have that problem?
Dead Reckoning. Yeah, because I was just listening to the podcast version of our Dead Reckoning Part 1 review, which is what you can find on Apple or Spotify or YouTube, but just wherever you get your podcasts, is that it felt like an Infinity War sense. Like Infinity War felt like a story. It felt like a beginning, middle, of end, but the ending is the heroes lose, you know? That's kind of Dead Reckoning, not necessarily the heroes lost, but it felt like a story but there's still more to be told. Whereas this, I mean, it felt so weird because it felt like one half of a story, except at least they killed that one villain. So in the next movie, we'll have a different villain. Oh, wait, they bring back Ed Skrein anyways. So like, it felt like the studio literally just mandated, well, you have to kill him a little. You have to defeat and it felt like such a weird workaround. Like I just, because I knew the larger, the behind the scenes story of that they had to split it into 2 movies. I'm like, well, that felt so like it was distracting almost, the way they dealt with the villain, and then they bring him back just so we could be back to square one in the next movie. It did not work. This movie did not work for me.
They should have killed him and then had the senator come into the field for part 2. So the senator is leading the troops from the ground again.
Yeah.
Because the way that they killed Noble in the end of the part 1, I thought that he was her adopted dad, and then I was like, wait, that doesn't make any sense. Because then in the communication, he gets revived and goes on that little telepathic magic communication thing to Belisarius, who's old now.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, you better do a better job in part 2. And then I was like, well, what is this weird backstory that's missing for Noble?
It just feels like all the beats, again, I hate to compare it, but like of Zack Snyder's Justice League. At the end of that movie, that Darkseid has been defeated. Not Darkseid himself, but his minion has been defeated. So then they say to Darkseid, like, what are we going to do now? He's like, ready the armada. We will use the old ways. Like, oh shit, Darkseid's coming to Earth. What the fuck? And it's like, it gets me so hyped for a potential sequel. This movie, the little cliffhanger ending, oh, Ed Skrein not really dead. I don't give a shit. I don't give a fuck. Like, it's the most frustrating. It feels, again, it's just like, it's like seeing everything I like bastardized and hung like a corpse in front of me in a way that I dislike. We're rewatching Game of Thrones because the first few seasons are really good. And now the first few seasons, I'm reminded of things that I like and how they get ruined later on. It's a very frustrating experience. It makes me enraged and it makes me angry. But that's what it feels like, again, watching Game of Thrones and then also watching Rebel Moon Part 1. That being said, I hope everybody joins us for our coverage of Part 2. Come April. This will be released in April. So whenever this comes out, just a couple weeks, we'll be talking about Part 2. Hopefully everybody's excited. I can't wait to see what that viewership is like. I don't know if it will be, if they'll have the same amount of viewers as Part 1. I imagine they'll have less.
Yeah, I mean, Part 1, what was the Part 1's numbers?
I have no idea.
Something like 34 million in the first couple hours.
It's just disappointing. You know, DC gets to be taken over by James Gunn, the hack director that he is. And then Zack Snyder is relegated to doing this. It's just, it goes to show, you know, you got to put people where they thrive. You have to put people in the right places so that way they can make the right projects. Zack Snyder should be doing DC movies. James Gunn should be fired. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. We're running out of time, John. I wanted to get your final thoughts. You go ahead, though.
Oh, I was just gonna say, if Zack Snyder had full authoritative control over the DC universe, do you think he would be doing this with DC? Like, would he fuck it up if he had full authorial control?
No. Zack Snyder's Justice League was amazing. I loved
If
it.
he'd stayed with DC, it would
That's
be
what
perfect.
I'm saying. It's all the elements of things I like, just repackaged and put together in the wrong way with a product I don't like. Like Rebel Moon has a lot of the elements of a Zack Snyder movie that I love. They're just used in the wrong way around a hollow story with weak actors, weak characters. It was very. I do think he had too much input on the story. He has a story by credit and one of the co-writing credits on the screenplay, I believe. Too much input on the story. They should have left him to maybe a minimal story advisor credit, and then directing is where he shines. So yeah, I think if you put him with the right project, the DC universe, he could thrive. We live in the wrong timeline. It's unfortunate, but that's just how we are, and that's why I can't recommend Rebel Moon. What would you say to people though? Would you recommend it?
No, it felt like a combination of Zack Snyder's Star Wars, Zack Snyder's Jupiter Ascending, and Zack Snyder's Part 1 of the Magnificent Seven. Kind of like all meshed into one. Like nothing was really new, nothing was done in a way that stuck out to me really. And I'll watch Part 2 to see how the story ends, and because I've already watched Part 1 and because we're going to talk about Part 2, but I wouldn't recommend anybody watch it. If I were going to recommend anything, I'd say wait until the R-rated versions come out and then maybe try those. But I have no way to confirm that because
you have no idea. Those could be even worse. And for what I'm betting, they probably will be.
I doubt they'll be worse. I mean, you gotta. Where's your faith in Zack Snyder?
It was it went out my soul at maybe the 30-minute mark of this movie. I was so disappointed. I was so disappointed with what I saw.
You got 30 minutes into Part 1 of the PG-13 version of a Snyder movie, and you were like, "Oh, he's washed."
I was so excited. I liked Army of the Dead. It's not like I didn't stick through.
Army of the Dead was fine.
It was fine. I even liked the aspect where people didn't like the depth of field. They thought it was too crisp of a depth of field. I liked it. I liked you couldn't see the background. I thought that helped, but it was whatever. We have less than a minute left, John. I want to thank you so much for joining the show. Is there anywhere that people could find you online? Would you just, of course, recommend they check out the Mission Matinee podcast?
Yeah. The Mission Matinee stuff is all really well done. It's really fun. But no, there's nowhere anyone can find me online. I'm not on Twitter or anything anymore, so I'm a ghost.
Thank you to our in-house ghost, John Lein. It's a pleasure talking to you, man.
Yeah, good to be here, man.
All right, that's our show. I'd like to thank John Lein for joining us this week. We're off next week, guys, but keep an eye on this YouTube channel and on TikTok. We will be posting a lot of shorts in the meantime. I'm Sam Carrico. Thanks so much for joining me. I'll see you next time.